welcome you all to this webinar, which is one of many that we are going to organize this year, specifically to provide a platform for researchers and practitioners in local government to engage on important topics that relates to this important sphere of government. I see that we are now on 57 participants. Maybe we could give it a few more minutes, maybe until 5 past 10, and see if we can get a little bit of more participants. So let's give it more time, and please bear with us. Thank you. Of today, and I'm sure along the way other people will join. A warm welcome once again. As I said at the beginning, my name is Ntliziywana. I work for the Dala Institute at the University of the Western Cape. We are excited to host you today in this webinar, which is one of many webinars that we are going to organize this year to engage on important topics that deals with local government. The topic today is quite important. We're dealing with the issue of integrity in local government. I think this is one of the topics that has dominated public debate over the past few years, and something that is worth exploring, and this is why we have decided to organize a specific discussion platform to deal with this particular topic. Before we start, just to remind you of the usual Zoom rules. Please, would you keep your mic on mute, unless if you have been identified to speak. Second, please, to improve, I think, connection, it may also be helpful to keep your video off as well, unless you've been invited to speak. You are free to use the chat box to raise any questions, to engage with fellow participants. We encourage you to do that. The program of today is organized as follows. We're going to have 3 important presentations on various aspects of integrity in local government. And these will be followed by a discussion session in the last part of the webinar. I'm honored to be co-facilitating this webinar together with my colleague, Dr. Shyam Johnson. She is a research fellow at the Dala Institute, and we work together in the multi-level government team. We have an exciting team of presenters. First, Jaap de Visser, who is a professor at UWC, and particularly the Faculty of Law and the director of the Dala Institute. He's also a member of the multi-level government team. We also work together with him on local government research. Professor Jaap de Visser is going to give a considered overview and critique of the legal framework for safeguarding ethical conducts of councillors and senior managers in local government. So that's what he's going to deal with today. The second presenter is Dr. Phindile Ntliziywana. He is currently a state law advisor in the Premier's office in Eastern Cape Province. He formerly was a lecturer at the University of Cape Town. And for us, we're exciting to have him today because he's a DOI alumni, a former member of the multi-level government team. And last, we're going to have Ms. Fatima Rawat, who is an associate and subject matter expert in the public sector team at the Ethics Institute. She works extensively in the local government sphere, and her recent project experience includes being part of the Gauteng Municipal Integrity Management Project, the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, and co-authoring an important guideline on local government ethics committee. So we're excited to have her. And we are appreciative of the support that we receive from the Hanseido Foundation, without which these webinars will not have been possible. So thank you so much to HSF for providing the financial assistance which enable us to host these webinars. And if you chat in the chat box, I have pasted a link to a survey, a short survey that would encourage you to complete. The survey will enable us to improve how we host these webinars and to identify some of the critical topics that we ought to look at. Without wasting much time, let's go straight into it. And I kindly invite Professor Jaap de Visser to take the platform and take us through the first presentation of the day. Professor Jaap, the platform is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanash. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. So it's up to me to get the conversation going. Good morning, everyone. Great to be with you. And also from my side, a warm welcome to everyone who took the time to join us this morning. And a special word of thanks and welcome to my fellow panelists and presenters. It's great to see so many of you here, so many familiar names, familiar faces. Great to be able to get such a nice interest in this important topic. And as I said, the task for me is to get the conversation going on safeguarding the integrity of council and senior management. And what I want to do with this presentation is really get the conversation going based on some observations that I would like to make based on my understanding of the legal framework and a section, just one section of a report that we produced in 2020 together with my fellow authors, Jenica Beekers, Tabile Nkonkwo, and Tanash Chigwata. We put together a report that was commissioned by the Western Cape Department of Local Government and sponsored by the Hans Seidel Foundation, which was really an assessment of the legal framework and the experience with the legal framework on combating corruption in local government in the Western Cape. And I would encourage you to have a look at that report. It's available on the Dalla Omar Institute's website. And what I'll be doing is not a comprehensive overview of the legal framework. I think many of us are well versed with it. I also want to focus my attention on quite a specific and perhaps narrow part of that story, which is a story around councillors. And I know it's a contentious topic. And I thought I would want to put some of my views across on what we discovered in that assessment that we did, which is based on a research, but most importantly also a set of interviews with practitioners in local government in the Western Cape. And again, I want to thank all of those who participated in that research and made it possible for us to put those views across. So I want to focus my presentation on the role of councillors and essentially share with you some observations on the implementation of the legal framework for combating fraud and corruption as it pertains to councillor misconduct. And in the further presentations by Dr. Ntliziywana and Ms. Rawat, we'll hear much more about a more comprehensive assessment of the legal framework, particularly also as it pertains to senior managers, as well as basically a response to what solutions we're looking at. And I want to sort of get the conversation going with a discussion on the experience with the approaches to combating fraud and corruption as councillor misconduct. And I want to sort of take us to two main approaches. There are many more, but there are two main approaches to dealing with councillor misconduct. The one is the disciplinary approach in terms of the code of conduct for councillors, which is contained in Schedule 7 of the Municipal Structures Act and essentially contains a list of do's and don'ts for councillors, the ethical code that councillors, once they are elected and take office, are subject to. The second approach is, looking at corruption as a criminal offense, which we will not, I'll put it there between brackets, not because it's not important. Of course, it is extremely important, but it's more because we will deal with this more elaborately in a later webinar, looking at the experience with the implementation of the legal framework for investigating, prosecuting, and conducting trials on corruption in local government as a criminal offense, also as it pertains to councillors. And I want to focus on the implementation of the Code of Conduct for councillors. And again, there are many other approaches that are being pursued to deal with councillor misconduct. Of course, within political parties, there are disciplinary procedures that are conducted. There are step-aside rules, and there's lots of approaches within political parties to this. We will not be focusing on that in this webinar per se. Of course, they are linked to the criminal offense approach, approaches related to the recovery of assets, etc., etc. But for this morning, just to get the conversation going, I want to focus on the top level here, which is the disciplinary approach in terms of the Code of Conduct for councillors, which is enforced by the Speaker at the Municipal Council, together with the MEC for local government. Essentially, there's lots of legal complexities here, but essentially the role of the Speaker of the Municipal Council is to investigate allegations of misconduct. The Speaker must investigate when there's allegations of misconduct. You would often do that with or through a committee of the council, make a recommendation to the council, and the council has to decide on sanctioning a councillor. If the finding is confirmed and a sanction is necessary, the council can issue a fine, a warning, a reprimand, or can recommend to the MEC for local government that a councillor must be removed from office or suspended. And then it is the MEC for local government's turn to also conduct his or her own investigation and then decide on that recommendation by the municipal council as to whether or not a councillor must be dismissed or suspended. So that's very briefly sort of the enforcement roles of the Speaker, the Municipal Council, and the MEC for local government, or as it's called in the Western Cape, the Minister responsible for local government. Again, there are nuances and complexities there, but for the time being, that should suffice in terms of getting a bit of an overview of how the Code of Conduct for councillors operates. I'm also deliberately not going through the Code of Conduct. It is there for everyone to consult, Schedule 7 of the Municipal Structures Act, and you find the rules in there, and I think we all intuitively would know more or less what kind of rules that would contain as it relates to dealing with councillor misconduct. And let me also hasten to say here that the involvement of councillors in dealing with corruption and fraud is not only viewed here as if the only role is for councillors to be prosecuted and that they misbehave. Of course, councillors have a huge role in conducting oversight and assisting the municipality with preventing and detecting and dealing with fraud and corruption in the municipality much more broadly. I will not focus on that, but I'm convinced that it will come back in the presentation by Ms. Fatima Rawat as part of the overall response to this problem. But what I wanted to share with you is the findings that we came across in the research that we did, interviewing practitioners in the Western Cape. And when we sort of interviewed people on what are the manifestations of councillor involvement in fraud and corruption, there was quite a variety of responses. Quite a few interviewees indicated, well, quite simply, councillors are not supposed to be involved in staff appointments or procurement decisions. So it's not really possible for them to be guilty of any kind of fraud or corruption in that respect. That was some of the responses, but other people responded quite vehemently saying, no, but there is clear allegations of fraud and corruption where councillors are involved, which sort of prompted us to make a distinction between direct involvement of councillors and more indirect or behind the scenes involvement of councillors. The direct involvement of councillors in this kind of, let's call it mischief, for lack of a better word, where a councillor is directly involved. A few examples were mentioned. For example, fraudulent claims around travel and reimbursements, etc. And that would have come up on occasion as incidents where councillors were involved. Mention was also made of the problematic, sort of phenomena of a councillor or a mayor exercising broad discretion of a special fund, like a mayor's fund, where the mayor would have, direct say on how a certain portion of the municipal budget is spent. And that is an area of vulnerability when it comes to a direct involvement by councillors in these kind of problems. And then using their position to extract favors, which would sometimes be quite sort of behind the scenes and difficult to detect. For example, one quote that I'd like to put across here is from one interviewee who said, there are councillors who would tell an EPWP worker or another worker, tell them, I bought the dress at such and such a shop, now please go and pay for it. In other words, using your privilege, using your power, your status to extract favors. Or a call will come from a politician to say, please replace the tires on my car in the municipal workshop. So those were the kind of examples that we heard about of direct involvement by councillors in fraudulent or corrupt activities. But the more indirect involvement of councillors was also mentioned by many interviewees. And obviously the thing that came up immediately was the issue of staff appointments and procurement, where an interviewee, for example, would say that staff appointments and procurement specifically stand out. My experience as a practitioner is that behind the scenes, some councillors exert pressure to achieve a particular outcome. And I think it's important to pause at the importance of this phenomenon where behind the scenes there is that kind of influence that sometimes is exerted by councillors on the municipal administration to achieve particular ends. And it is essentially a form of local state capture, because staff appointments are made, of course, through the regular procedures by the municipal administration, but behind the scenes, councillors sometimes exert pressure, with the aim not necessarily always to appoint someone who cannot do the job, who is not qualified to do the job, or who doesn't have the experience, but certainly with the aim of achieving the outcome that there is someone in the administration somewhere that is beholden to a councillor, which could be the mayor or could be any other councillor. And that system of having municipal officials beholden to you as a politician then becomes a very powerful tool of local state capture. And I think we need to see it for what it is, as an element of local state capture. And it was quite clear on the accounts of the interviewees that this is a problem in the local government system. And then linked to this also, sometimes what happens is that councillors trade confidential information. So one interviewee indicated that linked to procurement is the trading of confidential information, where councillors exert pressure on junior officials to share information for the ends that they would like to achieve. For example, sharing confidential information about an upcoming tender or an upcoming process in the municipal administration that would put certain people at an advantage because of having that confidential information shared with them. Now, sort of the general observations that I want to share quite briefly, and I want to be quite short about this because I think it's more important to listen to the other panelists and get the conversation going, is that councillor involvement in the serious corruption is very subtle and difficult to detect. The fraudulent claims and the kind of direct involvement usually is easier to prosecute and easier to detect because there would be a paper trail, there would be information that is quite readily available after some investigation, even by the municipality itself. to bring the issues to light and to prosecute it, either in a disciplinary setting or even in a criminal setting. But council involvement in very serious corruption is often much more subtle and difficult to detect. It is difficult to determine that there is a politician involved. It only comes often during the course of the investigation, the criminal investigation, or after the beans have been spilled. That is when you find, for example, that the majority of councillors decided not to prosecute this person because somebody is being protected, or when somebody says that the councillor told them to commit the corrupt act, but it is normally not from the outset. And the indications here are that it is often only through investigations by law enforcement agencies that it really becomes possible to detect the involvement of councillors in major corruption, where they were involved behind the scenes, because there's often no paper trail, no documentation within the municipality's administration that really points to a councillor. It's only after law enforcement agencies trace the money and find out that there are sinister payments into bank accounts outside of the municipality's reach, where these things are orchestrated. So the point to make here is that council involvement in serious corruption is subtle and difficult to detect. The other point that came through in a big way on account of the interview is the cost of resisting interference by municipal administrations, most notably the municipal manager. There's lots of accounts in the report, and I encourage you to read it, of practitioners saying, you know, if you resist interference, if you resist councillors who aim to exert that kind of nefarious pressure behind the scenes, if you resist that, there's a cost to that. There's a career cost, and often you get ostracized. You would receive threats, or your contract will be in trouble, your contract will not be renewed. So it presents quite a sinister picture of municipal officials, senior municipal officials, ending up in all kinds of personal and career difficulties as a result of resisting interference by councillors. And I think that is increasingly becoming a very, very problematic feature of the ecosystem of local government, unfortunately, where municipal officials would seek to protect the integrity of the municipal administration, then end up in all kinds of difficulty in terms of their career or even their personal circumstances. Now, going back to the Code of Conduct, we have this Code of Conduct, which is now in the Municipal Structures Act, Schedule 7, with all the rules and all the enforcement mechanisms, as I indicated earlier, with the role of the Speaker, the Council, Council committees, and the MEC for local governments. But when we asked the people that we spoke to about the challenges in enforcing this code, three things came quite prominently to the fore. The one is the role of the political leadership in the municipality, the role of the mayor and the role of the speaker. For example, the interviewees would share with us difficulties of just ensuring that an allegation against a speaker is properly investigated and that the findings are placed on the agenda of a committee or the council, saying that, you know, the role of the speaker is so important here because the speaker often controls the agenda. And some interviewees would tell us that, you know, if the speaker is not having it, you will simply not get it on the agenda of the council. So there's a gatekeeper role that sometimes is played by the speaker for sometimes for nefarious ends. Another issue that was mentioned was the difficulty of the weaponization of charges, that political battles are fought on the back of charges, or through the making of charges in terms of the Code of Conduct. That, you know, the fact that an allegation is made doesn't always mean that there really is a genuine instance of let's say mischief by the councillor, but sometimes these charges are weaponized and become weapons in political, factional, intra or inter-party battles. And in that sense, the Code of Conduct is sometimes abused. And thirdly, what came through very clear from the interviews is the real and perceived, sort of bias in enforcement, where a few quotes I think would illustrate this, saying that one interview saying, we're asking politicians to use this thing, the code, to deal with politicians, and it can only have one outcome. Another interview said, to be honest, it's a toothless system. Remember, at the end of the day, it is still controlled by the councillors. Seriously, it's a toothless system, and it's really about whether there is a political will to deal with a specific councillor. Another interview said, my experience is that it's used as a political weapon. When it is politically expedient to take it out, then it's taken out, the code of conduct. But when it's not, then we forget about it. So it really depends on who's in control in the municipality, and often also depends on whether there's alignment with those in control at the provincial level. In other words, also the perceived or real political bias extending to the political level or the provincial level with the MEC or the Minister of Local Government. And lastly, one interviewing sort of summarized it by saying, you're not going to find justice in the enforcement of the code of conduct. So that presents quite a bleak picture of the functionality of the code of conduct for councillors in dealing with those instances where councillors are either directly or indirectly involved in corruption or fraud. So what are the solutions? And I'm really looking forward to listening to Ms. Fatima Rawat, who's going to give a much more comprehensive response to sort of a systems-wide approach to dealing with this issue, where councillors not only obviously need to be, let's say, prosecuted when there is mischief, but also play a tremendously important role in exercising oversight over any other instances of corruption and the prevention of it in the municipal administration. But a few points that I would like to make is the importance, also based on the report that we did, the importance of delineating responsibilities between the political arm of the municipality and the administrative arm. It's an old theme and we're still struggling with it in local government, but it's crucially important. Also, the political backing for enforcement came through very clearly in the reports that we did. So important for municipal administrators, and also politicians who seek to pursue allegations of corruption or fraud on the political arm of the municipality, to have political backing from their political parties, from their coalitions, from their caucuses, for truly enforcing and safeguarding the integrity of the councillors and senior management. And I think it's also important to make the point here that we have the systems in place. We have the legal frameworks that by all accounts are not perfect, but certainly should equip us to deal with this issue robustly. So we need to also just implement the existing policy and legal framework. And again, I'm looking forward to Ms. Rawat's views on this, and also what Dr. Ntliziywana will have to say on the implementation of the existing policy and legal framework. The last point I want to make with an illustration is that we seem to be very focused on internal systems within the state, within government, within the municipality, within the province, within the law enforcement agency to deal with this. But I want to also emphasize the importance of more transparency and more accountability to the public. The system cannot solve this by itself. We need the involvement of the public. We need to regain the trust of communities and of the public in local government and be more transparent about these issues. And I want to illustrate that with an example which I want to pursue a little bit more also in follow-up research, is the Declaration of Financial Interests. And I want to end off with this slide. Or the last two slides. The Declaration of Financial Interest by councillors is regulated in the Code of Conduct. Essentially, it's a very simple system. It says that if a councillor assumes office, he or she must declare his or her financial interests and gifts above a certain level within 60 days. The councillor will have to fill out the form and inform the municipal manager and the speaker, who will keep this information on record in terms of what financial interests the councillor has, which companies he's part of, which shares he holds, which trusts he's part of, which gifts he has received, on which boards he or she sits. A whole list of issues must be declared by the councillor upon entering term of office to the municipal manager and the speaker, who will keep a record of this. This must be regularly updated. And most municipalities would link this to their supply chain management system, so that when there is a tender being awarded where any of these interests play a role, that red flags go up and that the system can correct based on the conflict of interest between a councillor and what is about to be procured or appointed. Now, furthermore, what the Code of Conduct says is the council must determine which of these financial interests must be made public, having regard to the need for confidentiality and the public interest for disclosure. In other words, the council has to make a decision which of these financial interests that the councillors have declared must be made public. Now, in my experience and on the basis of preliminary research, this does not happen. It's not made public because municipal managers and speakers, yes, they keep a record of it, but it sits in the drawer of the municipal manager and the speaker. It is not published. Some municipalities make it possible for an application to be made under the Promotion of Access to Information Act, and then the public can request the information to be made public. So in my view, that approach is unlawful. The council is instructed by the law here to make these interests public. Maybe not all of them. There may be some personal private issues that can be kept out of it, but most of it should be available for public scrutiny. And this is in no way different from what we already have for our members of parliament. If you want to find out what the financial interests are held by our members of parliament, you can consult Parliament's Register of Members' Interest. You can find each and every parliamentarian listed there and a list of his or her financial interests. Somehow we seem to think that local government is different and that councillors do not need to declare their financial interests to the public. And I think that is an unlawful approach. Also making it subject to an application under the Promotion of Access to Information Act, in my view, is unlawful because the instruction to make this public is already there. It's not dependent on an application by a brave citizen to have that made public. The council is already instructed to do so. So in my view, these are the kind of issues that we need to start taking more seriously as municipalities and involve the public more in the whole enterprise of regaining the trust of citizens and the public in local government and dealing with the integrity and ethics of councillors and senior management. I want to leave it at this, Chair. I've got a few other comments on the role of senior managers, but I'll reserve these for later in the conversation and look forward to the input of Dr. Ntliziywana and Ms. Rawat. So thank you very much for listening, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that presentation. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and I can see that the chat box is lively. A lot of questions are already being raised. And I think that overview of, I think the legal framework, I think it was quite on point. And also, I think it serves an encouragement for participants to go and have a look at the report, which I promise you has got more in terms of issues of integrity in local government. Now let's turn to Dr. Phindile Ntliziywana, who is going to give a critique of the legal framework for professionalization of local government. Phindile has done extensive research on this topic, and we want to, I think, get from Dr. Ntliziywana whether we are following the right approaches when it comes to professionalization. What are the alternatives? Dr. Ntliziywana, the platform is yours.
Thanks so much, Tinashe, and good morning to everyone present in the meeting. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides, but they're not yet in slideshow mode. So if you can put them in slideshow mode, it would be great.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute to this important topic of safeguarding the integrity of councillors and senior managers in local government. This is a great honor for me, and I'm going to be presenting a lot of the research that I've done on this topic. I've read quite a lot, but I cannot sum that up all in one presentation. But I'll do my best in giving you my thinking around this topic. The outline of my presentation is as follows. I'll be dealing with the legal framework for professionalizing senior management in local government. And that will be anchored by the following questions. Are we following the right legal or institutional approach? The second question would be, is the current system working? So throughout this presentation, I'll be looking at the legal framework and those questions will be shaping the discussion moving forward. This slide contains the legal framework for professionalizing senior management. As you can see, this starts in 1988 with the Profession of Town Clerks Act and the Municipal Accountants Act. It moves on to the South African Qualifications Authority Act, which kind of laid the basis for the repeal of the two acts, as we are going to see in the preceding discussion. The two acts were repealed in 1995 and in 2003, respectively. The Municipal Accountants Act was repealed by the Municipal Finance Management Act. Then we had, in 2006, Department of Provincial and Local Government, as it then was, which issued the regulations on competency requirements. This was followed hot on its heels by National Treasury, which issued its own set of competency requirements in 2007. Again, the COGTA passed a law, amended the Municipal Systems Act to deal with the same issues. And then later in 2014, it issues regulations on competency requirements, which were kind of sanctioned by the Municipal Systems Act. COGTA also issued regulations on disciplining senior managers in 2011, and then National Treasury, in its turn, issued regulations on disciplining senior managers for financial misconduct. So as you can see, these two departments seem to be vying for regulatory control of municipalities. There seems to be no consensus here within these departments. The framework outlined above does not speak to one approach in trying to answer this question. Are we following the right legal or institutional approach? The framework, the legal framework outlined above does not speak to one approach. So we can extrapolate the following approaches from that legal framework, excepting the one highlighted in red. This model operated before 1988, before the enactment of the Profession of Town Clerks Act and the Municipal Accountants Act. So we had this model before then. And then in 1988, we had the Statutory Association model, which was ushered in by the two statutes, the Profession of Town Clerks Act and the Municipal Accountants Act. And this model was replaced by the Generic Qualifications model. As you have seen in the legal framework, the 1995 Act, which I said laid the basis for the repeal of the two acts, ushered in the Generic Qualifications model. And this was followed short on its heels by the short-term delegation model, which in a sense sought to repair the damage made by the Generic Qualification model. I'm going to outline this in the next few slides. And then we had the performance management model, which was ushered in 2006 by the COGTA regulations, DPLG as it then was, and then National Treasury and COGTA introduced the standard setting model, firstly in 2007, the competency framework by National Treasury, and then the competency regulations by COCTA. So these are the models that can be gleaned from the legal framework. We are going to have a look at which model is going to assist us in the current problems we face in local government moving forward. Now, a quick look at these models. The non-statutory association model means that professional associations exist as private associations. They enjoy no statutory public regulations. As you remember, I said this model operated before 1988. So the professional bodies that operated at the time were not recognized by law. However, they determined standards for quality of their members in terms of the curriculum, capacity, and knowledge development. They also controlled the ethical behavior of its members through the code of conduct and sanctions. A few examples are the Institute of Town Clerks of Southern Africa, which was formed in the 1940s. The Institute of Municipal Treasurers and Accountants formed in the 1920s. So they operated since then until 1988 without a sanction of the law. So they operated as voluntary associations. Membership to these bodies was not a formal requirement. In fact, you had to be employed in a municipality in order to be a member. So membership to these bodies followed appointment into a municipality. So as a result, some officials were not members of these bodies. The next model is the statutory association model. As I indicated, this was ushered in 1988. Here, considerable power and autonomy is given to professional bodies to ensure that a particular sector is professionalized. In this regard, national government sets the standards for quality and ethics in a statute, and then mandate an existing body or create a new body established for that purpose to enforce compliance with those standards. Alternatively, national government establish a new or mandate an existing public body with both the determination and enforcement. So in this regard, national government does not set the standard. It just leaves it to the body to determine the standards and enforce those standards. Here, the exercise of powers and function is illegal if it is performed outside the institutes. So there's some ring fencing of functions. No one else can perform those functions if they are not registered with this institute. Here are the few examples: the Legal Practice Council, Health Professions Councils. I won't read all of these. They are on the screen. After 1988, there were the Town Clerks Council, which ensure that town clerks are now registered in order to perform any local government, any town clerks functions. They had to be registered with these councils. Same with the municipal treasurers and accountants. They had to be registered with the board for municipal accountants. Then there's a generic qualification model. Here, government introduces generic qualifications and set standards not specific to local government. These standards are applicable across the board to private and public sectors and to all relevant occupations. Now there's a single National Department of Education, which is responsible for registration of these standards and qualifications, and also for ensuring compliance with the provisions for accreditation. As indicated earlier, the South African Qualifications Framework Act ushered in this model. The memorandum on the objects of the repeal of the Town Clerks Act stated that given that this act, the South African Qualifications Authority Act, regulates this area, so the Profession of Town Clerks Act had become redundant. So that kind of facilitated the repeal of that act. This was followed by the short-term deployment. As indicated earlier, this saw the problem that emanated from the the generic qualifications model. So this, in a sense, was trying to fix the gap. It related to the deployment of experts on a short-term basis to fix a capacity problem in selected municipalities. A few examples here would be your project Consolidate, Manje, Secondment System, in terms of the Systems Act. So this approach was really gap filling rather than capacity building. We then had the performance management model ushered in 2006 by the DPLG regulations. Here, performance of officials is planned, reviewed, and improved. There is no emphasis here on entry requirements or inputs. The role of government is limited to making legislation which prescribes the framework for performance management. And then each organ must establish the necessary structures to manage and operate the system. Then to the standard setting model, national government sets the standards for quality and ethics of local government officials, and then ensure compliance by those officials with such standards. It also regulates professional requirements for holding office and prescribe sanctions for non-compliance. An example of this would be the 2007 Treasury regulations. Moving on to the Amended Systems Act, which has lapsed because it was declared invalid, and then the regulations giving effect to the Amended Systems Act, the 2014 regulations. So these are the standard setting models, examples of standard setting models. Now, the question that we should discuss at this point is who enforces this? And this is very important because it will determine, as Jaap has indicated in his presentation, whether these processes are toothless or not, whether this system is toothless or not. The framework, especially from 2006 to 2014, is enforced by municipal council when it appoints, and then the MEC also plays a role because the MEC receives reports from the council on appointments, and then oversees municipalities, and then the MEC can, take legal action if need be. And I say that this system is enforced in a haphazard fashion, as you recall. There are two departments that are seemingly vying for control of the sector with their own set of regulations and with their own systems of enforcement. So the result of this is that 15 years after the first regulations, the Treasury regulations, which said that the municipal officials must meet a certain qualification criteria, we have only 50% of those officials, senior managers, who qualify in terms of the regulations. And this is taken from Prof. Jaap de Visser's presentation elsewhere. He indicated that the courts are flooded with litigation. Only last year, there were 30 High Court cases on this issue. This indicates that there is a problem in this regard. Is the current system working? National government is letting municipalities down, given the overlapping laws, as I indicated, over-regulation, and this ultimately leads to impunity. And the fact that enforcement is driven by politicians and by not by the profession itself is a problem. That is why currently, 15 years on, we still have 50% of councillors meeting the requirements. The abolition of the 1988 statutes, the Provision of Town Clerks Act, and the Municipal Accountants Act was tantamount to throwing the baby with the bathwater. The right approach, as a result, or in conclusion, is that we should revert to the Statutory Association model, the one that operated since 1988. The standards have been set in the flurry of laws by COGTA and the National Treasury. All we need to do is to mandate the existing professional associations, and there are associations that took over from the SY associations. We have SIGFARO and ILGM, which are in a sense aligning themselves, their entry requirements with the legal framework that already exists. For example, SIGFARO is aligning itself with the Treasury regulations, while ILGM is aligning its entry requirements with the COGTA regulations. So what needs to happen is for national government to mandate these bodies, or if government is not satisfied with these bodies, to create new associations to enforce the standards, and then ring fence functions relating to senior managers. There is a need for law reform aimed at bringing professional associations to the forefront of enforcing quality and ethics of senior managers in local government. As I indicated, there are bodies already in the system who are playing a big role. All that is required is for a law, a statute similar to the Provision of Town Clerks Act and the Municipal Accountants Act to recognize these bodies or create new bodies, like I indicate, if these bodies do not, in the eyes of government, do not serve the purpose. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ntliziywana, for that, I think, overview, and for bringing out to the fore the fact that the current system is not working well. There are a number of challenges with the system, including enforcement, challenges over regulation of local government in a bid to ensure that the sector is professional. And you are arguing that the right approach is perhaps the statutory association model, which gives the role of professional associations a critical role in the enforcement and ensuring that there is integrity among their members, ensuring that the minimum standards are complied with. So thank you so much for that presentation. I enjoyed that one, and the overview of how, the trajectory from as far back as the 90s and even the late 80s, in as far as this topic of professionalization is concerned. Now we move on to Ms. Fatima Rawat. As I already said, she's an associate at the Ethic Institute. And the first two presentations were, I think, looked at this topic from a legal point of view, with Professor Jaap de Visser looking at councillors, looking at the code of conduct. So the starting point there was the law, and also Dr. Ntliziywana also looking at this topic and have a significant bias also taking it from the law. Ms. Rawat is now going to look at this topic from not only from a legal background, but from a comprehensive background. She's going to give a response to this topic of integrity in local government based on the work that the Ethic Institute has undertaken, which we think is quite critical in this topic in ensuring integrity management in municipalities. Ms. Rawat, the platform is yours, and thank you once again for making yourself available to participate in this webinar as a presenter.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Prof. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning and to share with you the work that we're doing. And Prof, I had initially started by wanting to share with you on just about the work that we're doing on the Local Government Ethics Committee Guidebook, but having listened to my colleagues present before me, I'd also like to use this opportunity to integrate into my presentation the work that we're doing around the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, because I think it's very critical to the conversation that we're having. So in terms of the work that we do, we have been fortunate to enjoy quite strong partnerships with SALGA, COGTA, the Model Regeneration Movement, as well as some of the provinces. Now, our starting point in terms of talking about ethics and integrity management in local government is firstly to appreciate the complexity of local government and its nuances, but also to find our point of reference in the local government anti-corruption strategy of 2016. Now, when we think about our history in terms of the language of anti-corruption and ethics, for the longest time, we talked the language of anti-corruption. And in fact, this local government anti-corruption strategy of 2016 is its second iteration. There was an initial iteration earlier on in the years, but really never took any, it really never took off. It sat there as a piece of paper. And what it needed was government partners to come together and really take stock of what was happening in local government and what was undermining the ethical environment in local government. And we started to see a change in our language from just talking about the language of anti-corruption or a punitive language to start to talk about the language of ethics and integrity management. And we saw that in the national trajectory, we saw it in the national anti-corruption strategy, in the thinking around the allegiances that we pay to international treaties, and in our own discourse, as we started to realize that when we talk about anti-corruption punitively, but when we start to talk about ethics and integrity management, we're actually starting to talk about building the professional ethical culture within our institutions and also the professionalisms of our individuals. So when we use the word culture of an organization, we say it's the way things are done in an organization. But when we talk about an ethical culture, we're essentially talking about the sort of culture where people do the right thing, whether someone is watching or someone is not watching. And with that sort of introduction in mind, what the vision of the local government anti-corruption strategy was for a sector where you have leaders who are unquestionably committed to high ethical standards. And it comes against the backdrop of the vision of leadership that was sitting in the white paper. And really that sort of leadership that was envisaged but not quite being achieved. And what the process of developing the anti-corruption strategy was about examining what was the problem statement that was undermining us achieving the type of leadership that we wanted to have. And so the second part of that vision was also about openness and accountability, and it's come out in the previous speakers as well, but that sense of openness and accountability should define the relationship with citizens, that there should be robust governance and oversight processes in place, and again, the issue of a professional ethical culture. And lastly, that corruption incidences should be dealt with justly and decisively. Now, what the strategy then did was it had three key strategic objectives, and I want to focus on the first two. So in the first, it talked about promoting community ownership. And under promoting community ownership, what the strategy envisaged was about the need for a national dialogue on governance and ethical leadership, and that dialogue should contribute towards the development of a code for ethical governance for local government. And I'll share with you the work that we're doing in that respect. Then secondly, what the second objective was about strengthening municipalities' resilience against corruption. And in that respect, what the strategy then did was it introduced a municipal integrity management framework. So think of it like a guideline, like a how-to in terms of practical ways in which we manage ethics and integrity management within our institutions. And it's not new for municipalities. Essentially, what the Municipal Integrity Management Framework did was it took all of the different pieces of legislation that we have and it packaged it in one place. And it says, if by implementing this piece of legislation in this way and in that way and in that way, what we're essentially doing, if we're doing it the way we ought to be doing it, we are contributing towards building strong institutions. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it. And the third element of the strategic objective was about building trust and accountability in our municipal systems. Now, the Municipal Integrity Management Framework is premised on this sketch. And this sketch basically sits at the heart of the thinking around the Municipal Integrity Management Framework, the local government anti-corruption strategy, but it finds its root within King 4. So if you think about King 4, the whole tone of King 4 is about ethics and ethical leadership. And even though King 4 has a municipal supplement, it doesn't exactly talk to our context. Now, what the local government anti-corruption strategy does is it adopts that idea about how do we build an ethical culture within our institutions, but adapts it to our context. And it says that if we want to get to the sorts of ethical cultures within our municipalities, where we have a culture that is, where professionalism is embedded, where people are ethical, we need a couple of things to happen. It's not just going to change by itself. So first and foremost, we need leadership commitment. And it makes a conscious distinction between leadership at political level and leadership at administrative level. So we need councillors or politicians who are committed, who set the tone, who declare their commitment to ethics, who make decisions that are ethical. We need administrative leadership who are able to drive ethics programs within institutions, and specifically then the role of the municipal manager as the accounting officer is quite critical. Then we need to, the word community ownership is premised on our understanding of a municipality based on legislation, that when we think about a municipality, our communities are part of that triangle of what makes up a municipalities. And the whole element of ownership is like as if you were in a corporate context where you would think about a community as your shareholder. Why your community is an ownership, is seen as a shareholder, is about the level of transparency and accountability that municipalities have. So start to treat our communities in that level of that we are accountable to them, not just about service delivery, but about the openness and transparency in which we engage. Then the third leg of the framework was around governance structures and capacity. And in that element, essentially what the framework says is that we need to have robust governance structures in place that exercise oversight and ask this really critical question. Are we supporting the building of an ethical culture within our institutions? And then in addition, it's also about having capacity in place within our administration of the municipality to support the building of an ethics or integrity program within the municipality. So not leaving it to chance, but proactively doing something about driving an ethics program within our institutions. And so at the heart of this municipal integrity management framework sits that integrity management program. And the thinking is that in order to drive an integrity management program, what we need is both proactive measures to drive in a program to create ethics awareness and keep ethics alive within our institution, but at the same time, we need reactive measures. So we need to deal with the bad apples. We need to deal with instances where people are going against the laws and not introduce new laws or new processes, but just be consistent in the way in which we're meant to be implementing our processes. So what the integrity management program talks about is that you need to have efforts to prevent things from going wrong. You need to, if something does go wrong, be able to detect it. When something does happen, investigate it and then resolve it. And what the integrity management, the municipal integrity management framework then does is it starts to unpack that in a little bit more detail. And then before I move off the fundamentals of what the framework says, it also encourages municipalities to have effective information systems in place to monitor what it is doing to drive its ethics program. Now, all of this in the line of the integrity management framework is about working towards that outcome of developing a culture within our municipalities where things are done ethically, whether someone is watching or whether someone is not watching. But the framework also appreciates the fact that as municipalities, we are different. Our contexts are different, so it speaks off the bat of the principle of differentiation. It understands that our contexts are different, but what it encourages our municipalities to do is to embrace the spirit of the local government anti-corruption strategy and municipal integrity management framework. And the central point that it brings across is it says that we need, as part of our ethics management programs, to be able to integrate our proactive ethics management efforts as well as our reactive ethics management efforts. Because when we focus on the preventative side or the proactive side, what we're doing is we're building the professional ethics of our institution and of our individuals within the institution. And when we focus on the detection, investigation, resolution elements, we're dealing with the reactive measures. And essentially what it's advocating for is a combination approach so that we're able to tackle both ethics as well as anti-corruption as part of an integrity management program within our institutions. And what the Municipal Integrity Management Framework then does is it starts to unpack, when it talks about prevention, what do we actually mean? When we talk about detection, what do we mean? And so if you look at the slide that you have in front of you, each of those blocks then further unpacks the levels of intervention that are needed as set out in the framework. Now, when we think about developing an ethics program within an institution, what we bring as the Ethics Institute is we encourage municipalities that before you develop an ethics program within your institution, pause and just reflect for a moment, what is it in your context that undermines your institution from being ethical? And the way in which that is being done is through an ethics risk assessment. So that's a way of an independent, qualitative and quantitative approach of engaging with internal stakeholders, your employees, and some municipalities want to engage with key external stakeholders to understand what undermines their institutions from being ethical, and to use that understanding from the ethics risk profile report to go off and start to develop an ethics program for the institution, and then leverage it into what the strategy is envisaging, as you see here, with the outcome being of developing an ethical culture within the institution. Now, what I share with you now, the strategy specifically talks about within the administration of the municipality, driving an ethics program under the leadership of the municipal manager, and then also having capacity in place within the administration in the form of an ethics office or an ethics officer to drive the ethics program within an institution. In the work that we've recently done through the Local Government Ethics Committee Handbook, what we try to do is we try to support municipalities by sketching out this landscape and trying to identify what are the ethics structures that should be in place within institutions, both at a political level as well as an administrative level, as well as the key role players that municipalities should start to have in place so as to proactively manage the ethics program within its municipality. Now, we think about proactive measures. Essentially, what we're talking about is not leaving ethics to chance. It's about doing something about it. And the strong drive that the Municipal Integrity Management Framework has is about leadership at a political level as well as at an administrative level, taking that leadership role and setting the tone within their respective municipalities. So if you look at the line that we've drawn at a management level, what the Local Government Anti-Corruption Strategy and Municipal Integrity Management Framework advocate is that they should, in municipalities, and I'm now specifically only referring to administration, be capacity in place in the form of an ethics officer who will drive an ethics program, an ethics champion, that would be someone senior who would take responsibility for championing the ethics initiative, preferably at the level of EXCO, and the municipal manager as the accounting officer taking ultimate responsibility. Now, one of the things that we don't have currently, and what the Local Government Anti-Corruption Strategy envisages, is that at the level of council, that there should be an appropriate council committee in place that exercises oversight and asks that critical question about, are we supporting the building of an ethical culture within our institutions? And often people say we have an ethics committee in place, but the ethics committee that we have at council level is that committee, which is a reactive committee. It is a committee that looks at the instances where our councillors are breaching the code of conduct. And this is not what we have in mind. What the Integrity Management Framework is envisaging is a proactive committee, like a social and ethics committee in a corporate context, but that being translated into a municipal context, where we start to exercise that governance and oversight and support the building of an ethical culture. In the work that we've been doing to inform the handbook that has recently been released. A lot of the feedback that we got in the consultations through the lead up to the development of the guidebook, people were saying that even though the Municipal Integrity Management Framework is talking about the administration, that scope or mandate of this envisaged committee, oversight committee, should extend to looking at the institution as a whole, not just about what's happening within the administration, but also to encompass what are we as an institution coming across it? How are we as a municipality being experienced? What is the level of interaction that is happening from our councillors that is affecting our reputation negatively? So even though the mandate of the speaker is clear in terms of how it is that the councillors' ethics are being managed, but to be able to have that all critical conversation as a subcommittee of council and ask about or engage on the ethics or the integrity of the institution and its stakeholders, and to be able to then, having exercised that oversight, take that discussion into council so that we have this all-important conversation. Copies of our handbook are available, and I will also share a link to it in the chat function. I want to move because a lot of what our previous speakers spoke about, my initial brief was to talk about what I've quickly shared with you. But I also want to use this opportunity to share with you this project on the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, because it resonates so well with what my colleagues have just shared with you. Now, the understanding or the objective of the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative was around the informing the development of a code for ethical governance in local government. And the reason that this came about was that in the work that had been done on the public sector ethics survey, on the myriad of research that all of you are so familiar with, this interface between politics and administration rears its head all of the time. And in all of the stakeholder engagement that was done on the development of the local government anti-corruption strategy, there was a strong call for the fact that even though we've got legislation, and even though the legislative parameters are clear, there's a gap. And what leaders at municipal level were expressing is that we need some way that we can go to for guidance when we experience a dilemma, when we feel conflicted, and it's beyond the legislation. There's a gap somewhere, and we're just not being able to hook that into something. And a lot is about the how-to aspects of how we govern or how we lead. And that led to the development of this project, which finds its root in the local government anti-corruption strategy. And the objective is that to inform the development of the governance code, and that governance code is not new, it is not an added regulatory burden, but it's a piece of the puzzle that already makes up local government, and the intention being to enhance the conversation around ethical leadership and good governance within municipalities. Now, in the data, what we've done, last year we did an electronic survey, we did focus groups, we did interviews across the country. And in the survey that we conducted, we asked people, what do they think undermines ethical leadership in municipalities? And we found a very interesting proxy for data that distinguished it between municipalities with clean audits and municipalities with disclaimer audits. And essentially what the data tells us is, and as some of the data that has already been presented shows us, is that in those municipalities that have disclaimer audits, a lot of the issues that render those municipalities dysfunctional sit on the level of criminality. And so it's difficult to even get to the basics of governance because of those criminal elements that are undermining the efficacy of those municipalities. And so if you look at what the data says, you'll find the greater ranking on criminal elements capturing the municipality in municipalities with disclaimer audits than those with clean audits. And in those with clean audits, because the interface, the reality is so different, those municipalities are sitting more with challenges around basic governance issues. So the call even for leadership or in those municipalities or for improvements around leadership are so much more different. The issues of councillor competency, the issues of stability differ. It's almost like a tale of two cities that one can see that the data shows us between these two differing contexts within municipalities. Program Director, I am aware of my time, but if I can just have maybe 5 more minutes to conclude. Essentially, what the data shows us is people are calling very strongly for a revisiting of what ethical leadership looks like in local government, against the backdrop of the white paper vision of local government. And the sort of leadership that people are asking for is around leaders who are guided by strong values, guided by morals, leaders who are brave, and the language of courage and bravery come up a lot in appreciation of how difficult this context is. But leaders who set the tone and who serve the community and are able to deliver on the mandate of local government. And as I showed you in the data, you can even see the difference when we ask people, is good leadership shown in your institution by your political leaders, by your senior managers? In institutions with clean orders, people have greater faith in their leadership as opposed to institutions with adverse or disclaimer audits where there's very little faith in the councillors or senior managers who are operating in those contexts. When asked what makes ethical leadership difficult, a lot of this resonates with what Prof. de Visser was sharing in the research that was conducted, but a lot of the themes center around the issues of accountability, the issues of inappropriate use of deployment practices, the issues around councillors themselves saying, I don't know what the line is. I don't know when I'm supporting, I don't know when I'm interfering, and I don't know when I'm intervening. And I need some guidance around what does that line look like. The issues of councillor competence and skill, and the fact that administrators come in on the back of some level of skill base and being recruited based on skill, whereas councillors don't, and the complexity that that brings into the institution are part of the challenges that undermine ethical leadership within the institution, is what the research shows us. When asked what should be done to improve ethical leadership in institution, a lot of what people call for is around issues of improved accountability, about arrests being made, and about accountability and consequence management being seen through, not around new laws or new processes, but around the fact that the mechanisms that we have in place for discipline and accounts and consequence management should be seen through. But that rests on strong leadership and political will to make sure that there's consistency in how that is carried out. You'll notice also a call for minimum education or competency requirements for councillors, and also for there was also a call made that communities should vote for individual councillors and not for political parties, with the concern being that politicians were more concerned about people who vote for them than serving the needs of the community at large. Last 2 slides from me. What people were asking for is a code that would set out clearly, concisely, practical guidelines if we talk about ethical leadership, and what would it look like? But that this code should talk to both senior managers as well as to politicians. So it must apply to everyone. It must deal with the principle around consequence management and accountability. It should clarify the separation between politics and administration beyond what is sitting in the law, because even though we still have this for forever sitting in our law, this still remains an issue. That the code should be a value-based code, not a rules-based code. That it should be based on values and principles that stem from the Constitution, from Batho Pele, and incorporate the ICAF principle, but really talk to the values of local government. What people are asking for in the code is that it should specify that the governance focus of municipalities is that municipalities should be run in the long-term sustainable interest of municipalities and its communities. And the key question that leaders should ask is what we're doing in the overall sustainable interest of the municipality? And if not, then that wouldn't be in line with the ethical governance focus and shouldn't be pursued. Essentially, what people are asking for is codes for good practice in terms of competence on committees, aspirations for councillor committees, clear separation of powers between councillors and officials, this over and above what is sitting in the law. So there's a very clear sense that don't repeat what's in the law, but we need some guidance because these problems are not going away. In fact, they're just getting worse. There needs to be clarity around the role of officials and the roles of councillors in terms of making up our municipalities. And also an added dimension from a broader stakeholder analysis was around the responsibilities of political parties, with a very strong call being made that political parties should be held accountable when they field councillors who are not competent, who don't have the characteristics of ethical leadership. And so they should be held responsible when they deploy councillors into municipalities who basically behave unethically, that they should avoid becoming overly involved in the running of municipalities, and also avoid conflicts of interest. And the last point that came out in terms of the data that we have is that the code should also guide the relationship between municipal leaders and communities. My colleagues have already mentioned the appointment process, but the strong call that has come out is around the fact that officials should be appointed based on skill, competencies, and professionalism, and not on the basis of their political party affiliation. So I'll stop here now just to say that the research discussion document on this project is available. We will be embarking on a countrywide consultation and engagement process, and we would like to invite all of you to please participate in these engagements. There will be provincial consultations that will be coming. So when we come to your provinces, please do participate because your voice is important, and we'd really like you to be part of helping us co-define or co-shape what this code for ethical governance would look like. Program Director, I'll stop at that point, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Rawat, for that presentation. I think it was quite comprehensive indeed, and you looked at this topic of integrity from many dimensions, which I think deserves it. And I think if I could just pick 2 points, I think the last point that you just mentioned, that political parties, I think, has a critical role to play. And I think this resonates well with what one of the participants here in the group has listed in the chat. And you also identified many problematic areas, one of which is the interface between councillors and administrators, as one of the areas that needs or requires attention. Let me now hand over to my colleague, Dr. Shyam Johnson, to facilitate the discussion for the next 30 minutes. Shyam?
Thank you, Prof. Chikwata. So I see the chat box has been heating up. There are so many comments. I think what I would do is I'm going to start with 3 comments from the chat box, and then if anybody can raise their hands with regards to the presentations that were made. And just to recap quickly, that Prof. de Visser spoke about the legal framework for the anti-corruption, and I state the findings of research from the Western Cape was presented. Also, he presented certain solutions with regards to issues on that matter, and then Dr. Phindile took us through the presentation on professionalization of senior managers, and he asked 3 pertinent questions. Are we following the right legal institutional approach? He asked, is the current system working? And he ended off also suggesting what the right approach should be in the Statutory Association being identified as the correct approach. And then Ms. Rawat gave us an extensive conversation, very comprehensive, about what should work legally, but not just looking at it from a problematic perspective, problematizing the issues, but then also identify what are the resolutions, how do we go about it, and then coming with a pragmatic idea of how these issues of integrity should be embedded in local government municipalities, following initiatives such as opting for prevention, detection, investigation, and resolution. And my colleague has already expanded on the other issues that Ms. Rawat has presented. So on that note, there are many comments. I'm going to do 3 at a chance, and then I'll go live and look for, so please raise your hands if you would like to pose a direct question. I'm just consulting the chat box. Okay, and so the first question comes with Andrea Harris. Good morning. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Not only have webinars allowed academics from across the country, but also for those like me who are consultants in the development aid arena. Okay, thank you for that, Adrian. Okay, and then we have the next comment. Okay, these are all welcoming messages. Okay, so then that's Adrian again. So Schedule 7 is written in quite a complicated legal type language. Has an easier version been written, not only for those who do not have English as their mother tongue, but also for those elected councillors who have not necessarily had access to education? So seeing that it's dealing with a code, Prof. de Visser, I think that is directed at you. And then the last question that I'm taking from the comment box, what also makes the detection of irregular acts and corruption in local government is the risk that whistleblowers face both their jobs and lives gets exposed. So that's more of a comment. So Jaap, if you maybe want to respond to the question.
Yeah, thanks, Shyam. Let me do so very quickly because there are many other points that we can also respond to. The accessible version of the code, I'm convinced there is one, and there may be versions of it. And probably here I also want to trumpet the work of the Ethics Institute. I think the documentation available on their website would also be extremely useful. I would also imagine that SALGA, in its induction material for councillors, would have made an effort to simplify the code of conduct. Could also refer maybe to the local government bulletin, which is a newsletter available on the Dalla Omar Institute's website. So I can't give you a specific example, but I agree it's extremely important, and I'm convinced there are accessible versions of the code of conduct out there. And then the point of whistleblowers, now I completely agree, and it's the point that I tried to make. You know, the cost of resisting interference and the cost of bringing interference to light and resisting it is dearly for many. I mean, people got killed for raising these issues. So, and I think it also has to do, it's not something we can discuss here at length, but the issues that are raised by prominent whistleblowers is, what is really the protection for whistleblowers in the broader legal system? How are they protected? How are their livelihoods protected? And how do we incentivize, as it were, whistleblowers instead of punishing them with ostracizing and removing their livelihood and sometimes even death threats and worse? So completely valid points made there. So let me leave it at that, Shyam. Thanks.
Thank you, Jaap. I'm just looking at any hands raised. I don't see any. So if there aren't any, sorry, is that a question?
It's Fatima, Shyam.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, if I can maybe just add to what Prof. de Visser was saying just about the whistleblowing. In the research that we've done, and I'm combining what we've done on the Public Sector Ethics Survey as well as the South African Business Ethics Survey, there's a very strong correlation between the ethical culture of an institution and the actually utilization of the whistleblowing or safe, I prefer to use safe reporting mechanisms. So if people feel that the mechanisms are trusted or safe, they will utilize the mechanism. But if people feel that nothing's going to be done, or if they don't feel safe, they're very unlikely to utilize those mechanisms. And you find that in the public sector environment, high levels of distrust in utilization of the whistleblowing mechanisms relates to two things: the integrity of the process, so people don't believe that if I'm going to report, something's going to be done about it, and then the issue of safety. And I'm referring to the 2018 data, and we've just concluded the 2021 survey, and I suspect that the issues around safety are going to be higher now in this iteration, given the recent events. So just to also make that link between safe report, from a compliance perspective, having safe reporting mechanisms in place is one thing. The question really is about the integrity of the institution and of the processes that we put into place. Thanks, Jaap.
Thank you, Fatima. Andrea, your hand was up. Okay, in that case, then we go back to the chat box. So Marianne has a question. Please, okay, sorry, let me just take the question first. Phindile, go ahead. You're muted, Phindile.
No, thanks, Jaap. I would like to react to the question that was directed to Jaap around the accessibility of the codes. I think the other element to that question is the translation into the official language of the community. I feel that councillors at times are thrown at the deep end, more like students in university. They are supposed to be, hitting the ground running, as opposed to be studying complicated documents, IDPs, budgets, and all those things. So the codes and other documentation should really be in the language that is accessible to them in their home languages.
Thank you, Phindile. Are there any other questions that people would like to pose directly before I consult the chat box? Okay. So at the chat box, there's a question for. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Courtney. You may proceed, Mr. Sampson. You are muted, so we're not getting your question.
Thank you very much. I was trying to find my way around this thing. Thank you very much. I think the questions I have, there are just two. First of all, I think that the distinction between a candidate and a councillor is significant in my question. You know, the candidate is determined by the political party. The councillor has got the legislation that we've referred to so aptly. And I think that the question I have is, what do we do when a person represents her or himself as a candidate, for example, through misrepresentation of curriculum vitae, becomes a councillor, and then the councillor, where the person is the councillor, the issue comes out. What does one do under such circumstances? And I know that it becomes a public issue, but is it then the public who is expected to lay a criminal charge against somebody like that for misrepresentation? Or obviously what we would really prefer is that it is dealt with within the council itself. The other question is that very often one finds that councillors are hesitant to point out other councillors who do wrong, because they themselves are also not guiltless completely. So those are my two comments that I would really like to have some response on. Thank you very much.
To the panel, the presenters, would you care to answer that question immediately?
I can give it a try, Jaap.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Courtney. I think that as we've come to expect from you, a very important but difficult question to answer. It's I think it's such a critical distinction between candidate and councillor, and I don't think actually we pay enough attention to that process of candidacy. What happens in the run-up to elections and in the run-up to the compilation of party lists and the nomination of ward candidates. I noted, and it's also somewhere in the chat box, I mean, there's some very encouraging and great initiatives that took place that I know of, you know, in and around the city of Cape Town with you know, community organizations, civil society, conducting interviews with candidates and really sort of bringing their candidacy more to the forefront. The role of political parties is, of course, absolutely critical in vetting and nominating people of integrity and quality. But after a councillor has been elected, the candidate has been, let's say, elevated to the position of councillor, and then it comes to light that there's misrepresentation. I would imagine, you know, in terms of the code of conduct, there is that opening for the council to act against that councillor, because, you know, the code of conduct, you know, has one of these offenses, you know, that one always uses in sort of, like often is the most popular one to be used. You know, you bring the municipality into disrepute, you know, and that could be a charge leveled against that councillor. You brought the municipality into disrepute by misrepresenting yourself during your candidacy. But again, it is then dependent on politicians acting against politicians, and we run into the same shortcomings of the implementation of the code of conduct that I spoke about. You know, and it brings up the, you know, this discussion about, should communities have the right of recall? Should there be a system in our legal framework that communities can petition a councillor to be removed from office, which I think is a very, very complicated legal issue. And it also, I think, for me, goes to the issue of what happens in communities. I mean, somebody was asked to comment on the issue of the mayor of, you know, former mayor of Kanaland, you know, a convicted child rapist. And I can say that bluntly as I do, because it's been confirmed by a court of law, who campaigns as a ward councillor in a community. So his poster and his name is out there. Everybody knows who he is, yet communities elect him as a ward councillor, and he then gets elevated to the position of mayor, which I think now has been revisited. But so it also points to, I have to say this, you know, that the ethics of communities, you know, what happens in communities when they vote for people who have clearly, you know, shown themselves not to have the integrity that we need in local government. So it is a multifaceted issue, and not something, yeah, that has easy answers. But I think the difference between candidacy and councillor is a very critical one. And I think we need to pay more attention as a public and as a media to this issue of who is actually standing for councillor in communities, and what do we do in terms of bringing issues to light that are important in the choices that people make. Thank you, Jaap.
Thank you, Jaap. So the next question I have, Strak Rambani. Please, may you go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to find out, there are a few questions that I want to find out. The first question will be that of the appointment of the Section 56 managers and the one of the city manager. You would have seen recently in the eThekwini municipality, in the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality, also the city of Johannesburg, since there's a coalition government, there has been a lot of problems when it comes to the appointment of the city managers, because some coalition partners favor another person that do not want another person. One of the issues that I have got with the appointment of those Section 656 managers is that of allowing a councillor to sit in those interviews, whether it's the MMC, whether it's the executive mayor, the fact that that person is a councillor. And that one has caused a lot of a problem, and especially now because of the coalition agreement. Some people, they will favor some other people to actually advance their political agenda, not to advance that agenda of the resident of that municipality. That's one biggest question that I have. Maybe the legislation should change and say the people who should sit and recommend the city manager should be the external expert that can come and recommend the best candidate for that municipality, looking at the lead of that municipality. They can actually try to understand what kind of if it is a metro, what kind of a qualification the person can go there, and that person can then be able to achieve the goal that that municipality want to reach. That's number one.
Thank you, Srat.
Number two,
I think we can just move on to the next hand that was raised, because we are pressed for time. So, Phindile, you had your hand raised. Phindile,
Thanks, Siam. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I wanted to react again to the distinction between a candidate and the councillor. Over and above what the ANC does to identify candidates before elections, I think there was an important development here in the Eastern Cape where the Premier issued a directive to say what candidates must have certain qualifications. I'm not sure of the extent to which this was implemented, but I know one person who later became a ward candidate who had to go and do a course. I didn't check the details, but she had to go and do a course, then afterwards underwent the processes within the ANC. So that, I think, was an important development. And I think it's important because the law cannot force councillors to have certain qualifications. That is as per the Constitution. The Constitution says everyone has a right to stand for office, so you can't really force politicians to have qualifications. So that was an important development, in my view.
Thank you for that, Phindile. And then, Paul, I see your hand was raised for quite some time now. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. My question is just one question. I would like to direct that to Fatima, and it's a question of protecting whistleblowers. Is there any plans within the work that you're doing to enforce protection of whistleblowers? Because there could be an interest from the public or even by the people who work in the sector that would like to, pin out some of these misdeeds. But is there anything that the work you're doing really coming close to ensuring that whistleblowers are protected? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So my colleague Liesel Groenewald is our expert on whistleblowing, and she's recently published 2 handbooks. One's called the Whistleblowing Guideline, and the other one is the Non-Retaliation Toolkit. And I'll drop our website onto the chat box. So we've got these free downloadable guidebooks that you can go off and have a look at. And the one really to helps municipalities or helps institutions talks about how do you create a safe reporting environment or culture. And Marianne, I saw your comment, and if I can just grab it all in one and just say that in our historical context, whistleblowing has a very negative connotation, like impimpi or, something that's really has a bad connotation. So increasingly, the preference is to rather create a more positive mechanism through the use of safe reporting. Now, one of the things that Liesel and a couple of the other whistleblowers like Cynthia, Simple, and others have done is they've recently created the Whistleblower House, which is a initiative that has been created to provide support to those who have opted to blow the whistle. Because as you would have seen in the media, it's quite emotionally and financially taxing, and people don't really have support. So there are a lot of initiatives underfoot. And I will also, if you're very keen, Paul, to know more, I'm happy to share these details with you, because she would be the appropriate expert on our team to engage with on this area. Okay, Paul, I hope you covered. Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Jaap.
Thanks, Fatima. Jaap, would you like to address the question of strike with regards to the Section 56 and appointments with councillors being present?
Yeah, let me do so very briefly, and you know, maybe also a bit bluntly, if you allow me. I've been in this sector now for more than 20 years, and I'm starting to lose patience with some of these you know, issues and running out of nice words to say. I think we're losing the battle. I think we're really losing the battle around the appointment of senior managers. The legal framework now, as Phindile explained, basically entrusts politicians to guard the integrity and the quality of senior managers, and that is failing. It's failing in far too many places in local government. I'm saying that also based on the point that Phindile made. Last year, I did the update of local government law in South Africa. I had to throw through 30 high court cases, 30 high court cases about suspensions, dismissals, municipal managers losing their jobs and regaining their jobs, and councillors fighting with one another over municipal officials. I think we're losing that battle, and I think we need a change. We need something that disrupts that system, because clearly the system that we've chosen, which is to entrust the council and the MEC for local government as the policeman for quality and integrity of councillors, it's not working. And we need somehow to disrupt that. Either we need a system that brings the Public Service Commission in, or some other, you know, the point that Phindile made about bringing professional associations in, because I think we're losing the battle. And I think all these examples of councillor interference in appointments, there are so many, and they are all over the legal system. They're all over local government. We're losing that battle, and we need to look at new institutional measures to make proper appointments, because the current system is not working. Thanks, Jaap.
Thanks, Jaap. That is quite insightful, Jaap. Thank you. And then Ntliziywana, please, may you pose your question?
Thank you for that. I hope you can hear me. So,
Yes.
so there's this EFF MP in Parliament, Mam Kaula, who once said that one of the problems we have is that we are moving criminals around, and for quite some time, I have even myself begun to believe that in local government, that's where we dump the worst amongst ourselves. And I believe one of those, I mean, the reasons are many, and I just want to find out if maybe having a vetting process of some sort would help. Does the legal framework provide for that? Who looks at the CVs of these candidates and try to determine, like, who are they? What kind of corruption cases are they facing? Because also recently I heard that there was a municipal manager, someone who was being moved from Limpopo and being dumped in some faraway municipality somewhere. And I was thinking to myself, how will people know who checks these, especially at a municipal, like when it comes to municipal officials, your municipal managers and all of that? Because I think the main thing is that the criminals are being rotated around by their own political parties, and there isn't much that is happening either at a community level, because we are also corrupt as well, or because we also don't know if someone comes and they're coming from, where I'm based in KZN, and someone comes from Northwest and being dumped in my municipality. How will I know as an ordinary member of that municipality? Is the vetting, does the legal framework provide for that? I think that's my question.
Thank you so much, Ntliziywana. I just want to take another question from Bernard Mutsha. If you can please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I would like to raise the question that actually prompted by Samson, the candidates and the councillors, the type that we have. You know, Botswana is a very unequal country when it comes to incomes. And most of our candidates, they want to become councillors, not because they are quality staff, but because they are looking for a job. That's number one. Number two, when now they've been voted into office, most of the time they want to please the communities by attending funerals, by making some contributions to weddings. And this comes to an issue which was raised by Fatima of community ownership. So it's difficult for our communities to make these people accountable because they are nursing the favors that they get. Also, earlier on, Professor Visser also referred to an issue whereby other councillors, they could be able to hold others accountable. Unfortunately, because of the fear to lose that job and that organization, they keep quiet and not raise queries when others don't perform. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Fatima, I respond to both questions.
Yeah, so I mean, the issue. Sorry, I feel like my voice is bouncing back.
There's an echo.
Okay, thank you. I want to raise in the IEC has a code for election ethics, you know, all political parties are meant to are actually signatories to that code of election ethics. And what it does is it does place an onus on the political parties to ensure that the nature of the candidates that they are putting up for elections are of a particular caliber. So, and they uses the words ethical and competent within that code. And so first and foremost, there's that to throw into this conversation that I think we need to be mindful of. A lot of what we're getting is also about the accountability of political parties for the nature of the candidates that they deploy. And one of the things that we envisage is a work or kind of consultation session with political parties to exactly raise these issues around accountability for the nature of the candidates that they are deploying. I wanted to also share into the picture that the legislation doesn't require councillors to have any particular educational qualification. And part of the reality that we get from the research is councillors express feeling vulnerable. They express feeling actually taken advantage of by officials, and often sometimes being misled by officials who may be tech savvy or very academically qualified. So there's often, I think the picture is quite complex. Certainly everyone seems to agree that there needs to be a basic level of councillor competency that needs to be in place in order for councillors to be able to effectively exercise their oversight role. Because at the end of the day, councillors are sitting in a governance responsibility, and to be able to exercise that oversight, what are some of the preconditions that need to be in place? And just to share with the research, the research that we are finding on that particular respect on councillor competence, Sham. So yeah, yes. I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatima. I'm just looking at the time, and I see we have that we do have 5 minutes left. So I would like to firstly thank all the participants for engaging robustly in the chat box and also with the very interesting questions that were posed. And then I would also like to remind everybody that Prof. Chigwata has put a link in the chat box, a survey, and we really would appreciate your feedback on the survey. So I would encourage you to please do the survey before you leave. And then in terms of closing, there are two, pardon, my throat is groggy. So there are two things that I think stood out really from me, from all the presenters. And the one issue is that this is not an easy matter to overcome. The integrity of senior managers and politicians are in a critical state. And it's to the point where when it comes to the appointment of senior managers, for example, Prof. de Visser was saying that we need to disrupt the system. Also, an incident was given of councillors that are put forward, supported by communities that come with a criminal background. So the integrity of politicians are something that the community would have to take ownership of and have to be proactive. And from the presentation that was rendered by Dr. Phindile, we were seeing that what are the legal reform that can be followed. And once again, citizens and communities and residents are part of the law reform process. And Fatima Rawat has identified the key principles of the local code that they are working on, and that where the community participation comes in, and that seeing community members not just as important towards service delivery, but as well as shareholders, adopting principles from the King's Four in terms of governance. So there will be further discussions on these matters, but I think that the take home is that as citizens, as activists, that there needs to be serious progressive and proactive action from all spheres involved. And on that, I would like to conclude. We have 2 minutes, so if there are any other further closing remarks from the presenters, I will give you the opportunity, seeing that we still have 2 more minutes. Fatima, do you have any closing remarks?
Just thank you to everyone for the opportunity and the engagement. I think we learned through every interaction. I just wanted to close off by saying that the question on the integrity, the pre-employment screening and vetting is in fact one of the biggest risks that is being identified for local government. And it's something that certainly needs further deliberation. Thank you, Shyam and Prof, for the opportunity today.
Thank you, Fatima. Yeah, would you like to say any last words?
No, nothing further from my side, Shyam. Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for this very exciting and informative, robust discussion. Thanks to my fellow panelists. And thanks for everyone for attending. Thank you so much. Bye.
And then Phindile?
Nothing much from my side, Shyam, except to say that I kind of echo what Jaap is saying about the system that is not working. And we really do need to lobby each other in the sector so that a law is passed on professional associations to take charge of ethics and professionalism at local level. I think we need to go that direction as robustly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Phindile. Thank you to the presenters and thank you to all the participants. Like I said earlier, please do complete the survey. It is much appreciated. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much for the session.
Thank you, Bernard.